Okay, planes and sections. So planes and sections are basically going to be used when we're talking about microscopic images and when we cut tissues to observe them, for some sort of pathology. Okay. So a plane is the imaginary surface that is being used to divide the body or organ, and then the section is the resulting piece. Okay, so you may cut a carrot in a cross section, which then gives you carrot rings, right? You may cut it along the longitudinal plane, which will give you carrot sticks. Those would be the actual sections. So the rings and the sticks are the sections. Whether you cut it cross-sectionally or longitudinally would be the planes. Okay, so that sagittal plane we had mentioned before to you, the sagittal plane will divide the body into a left and right half. If we cut it straight down the middle, right at that midline, we'll produce equal halves. If we cut anywhere off of that midline, so if we have it a cut that goes like straight down this way or something, obviously we're not going to produce equal halves. We'll have unequal halves. So that's considered a parasagittal plane. Sometimes what we'll have is a coronal plane. This is also known as a frontal plane. You can see that one right here. It divides the body or an organ into front, anterior, and posterior portions. The cross-sectional plane that I mentioned earlier is also known as a transverse or horizontal plane. Any of those terms are correct. I tend to use cross-sectional more often than the other two. In any case, that'll divide the body or the organ into an upper, superior, or lower, inferior portions. Okay. And then an oblique plane, you can see down here at the bottom, that basically means that it's at some sort of an angle. Whenever you hear the term oblique, it means at an angle. All right, so we're just going to go over a few other basic things, and then we'll be done with our introduction chapter. Your body has cavities in it that are then filled with organs, and this should be very obvious to you. You have a cranial cavity that houses your brain. You have a vertebral canal that'll house your spinal cord. In your thoracic cavity, you have what's known as a pleural cavity that will house your lungs. There's a pericardial cavity that'll house your heart. There's something called the mediastinum that houses portions of the heart, as well as blood vessels and tubes going from basically your throat down into your abdominal area. The abdominal pelvic cavity is also split into two different areas: the abdominal area that has most of your digestive organs, and then the pelvic area where you have things like your reproductive organs, some of the large intestine, as well as bladder and stuff like that. You have an oral cavity, that is your mouth. Orbital cavity, that's where your eyes are. Middle ear cavity, that's where you're going to have little bones that allow you to hear. And then we'll have other cavities at joints called synovial cavities. We'll talk much more about those when we actually get to the chapter on joints. Okay. These cavities are lined by membranes. Okay. There's two different layers to this. So as you can kind of see in this, they give you the analogy of a person punching into a balloon. So that inner part where you're punching into the balloon that would actually line the hand, that is considered the visceral layer, versus the outer layer that's not exactly touching the hand is considered the parietal layer. Now, basically what that means is that the visceral layer is going to be on the surface of organs, whereas the parietal layer will line the cavity itself, the walls of the cavity. In between those two, in between the parietal and visceral layer, there will be a fluid, and that fluid is there to reduce friction. So the cavities that will have these membranes are the pleural, pericardial, and abdominal pelvic. In the pleural cavity, we have what we call pleura. So again, visceral pleura will simply cling to the surface of the lungs, whereas parietal pleura will line the chest wall. And in between the two, we'll have a nice serous fluid that basically prevents your lungs from just simply sticking to the walls of your chest. You can imagine how bad an idea that would be. Surrounding your heart, you also have visceral and parietal membranes. In this case, we don't call them pleura, we call it pericardium. So similarly, visceral pericardium will cover the surface of the heart, whereas parietal pericardium forms a tough sac, but that the heart is actually going to sit in. And again, in between the two, there's going to be fluid. Because again, as the heart is moving, right, constantly, while you're alive at least, it's basically, you want to make sure that it's not going to be sticking to like the lungs or to itself. And then finally, the abdominal pelvic area also has a membrane. It's a little bit harder to see in this image, but we call that the peritoneum. So again, visceral peritoneum is going to cover the actual organs in the abdominal area, or the viscera, and then the parietal peritoneum will line the abdominal wall. So you may just want to take a quick second and do a thought check and think about it. So just recap real fast, when they line the walls of the body cavity, we call them what? When they line the organs, we call them what? And then the 3 body cavities. If you don't remember, just click back a couple of slides, check out your PowerPoint. You will see it right there. All right. We take this torso area, or I should say the abdominal pelvic area, and we'll often divide that either into regions or into quadrants. And these quadrants or regions are used to describe sources of pain or dysfunction or some sort of pathology. Like, where did the individual show discomfort? Oh, they show discomfort in the upper left quadrant. Maybe they showed discomfort in the upper right quadrant. That's where the pain was located, or the lower right quadrant. So again, you can either use either one of these terms. Some places will use more of the regions. Some areas use more of the quadrant system, but you should be familiar with both. I just want to quickly go through with you some medical imaging techniques that are used. We won't go into great detail, again, just very quickly. So radiography, that's our fancy way of saying x-rays. And these days we use it for more than just taking images of bones. So mammography really is simply a fancy type of x-ray. So is bone densitometry. Right? So here you can see the bone density measurement. The individual lies on this machine, and then the machine basically takes a look, takes an x-ray, and you can actually see how dense that bone is. When we're looking at MRIs, this is really interesting. So it is what it states. So basically the body is being exposed to high energy magnetic fields. And if you've ever been in one of these machines, it sounds like it just makes all this noise at you, right? Basically, the magnetic field is so high that the protons in your body actually arrange themselves relative to the field. Then the machine pulses radio waves that it can then read the patterns of these ions. The computer can interpret that and turn that into an actual image. So here, and this is very good for things like soft tissue. So not so much bone, like x-rays can only do so much, but MRIs give you very nice detailed images of soft tissue. A CT scan, or computed tomography scan, basically this also uses x-rays, but now it's a little bit more, it's basically a sophisticated x-ray. So again, you'll take images at different angles, and then you're going to use a computer to form a slice of the body. So what's kind of nice is that it allows you to screen for types of cancer. So here is an example. So here's a cystic tumor in the pancreas of this individual that they're able to see based on this CT scan. Ultrasounds have gone a long way. Obviously, we use lots of ultrasounds for pregnant women. So here's 2D, 3D, HD live ultrasound. I mean, that's pretty impressive how far the technology has come. So you can see it's just high frequency sound waves that are sent through the body. It's picked up and interpreted by the machine that's sending the information. Okay. Some other times, ultrasounds are used in other internal organs to see if they can detect any kind of problems with like blood clots and things like that. PET scans are kind of cool. So what ends up happening with a PET scan is that you have a substance that emits what are known as positrons. Usually the substance is going to be a specially manufactured glucose, right? So glucose, as you know, is the main sugar that all your body cells are using for energy and to make ATP, right? So theoretically, and this is actually true, the cells that are more metabolically active are going to use more glucose, right? So the ones that are really active are going to light up on the screen. Okay, so anyway, these tissues will take in these positron-emitting substances, this positron-emitting glucose. Those positrons collide with electrons and they form gamma rays. And then again, you have the special cameras and the computer that then interpret that image. So this is used in looking at physiology, not so much looking to see if there's a structural deficit, but whether or not there's a deficit in function. Because again, if you're using glucose, if you're not functioning properly, you won't use glucose properly, right? So in this image that you're seeing here, so you see there's this transverse plane cut through the brain, and you're looking at it kind of looking up into the brain. And what you'll see, the red spots are the areas where the brain is active. Now, the scary thing to you, and the thing that should make you go, is this very large blue-black area in the upper left corner. That basically shows that there's no brain activity going in that entire part of the brain. So what happened to this individual is they suffered a massive stroke, and that part of the brain is no longer functioning. Endoscopy, so an endoscope basically is like this long tubular instrument that has a camera at the end. It can be inserted into the body to take images. So what you're taking a look at here is an ulcer, it's a stomach ulcer. And so here's just some views of different endoscopes. So here again is looking at an ulcer. It may be looked at the esophagus. You may look at it in a colonoscopy, right? You may look at it to see if there's any kind of problems with the gallbladder duct. So all these are uses for an endoscope. So basically it's very handy when you don't want to have to cut somebody open. You can just insert one of these. A lot of times they will have different tools on them that can then go and either cut something off or sew something together as well. And that's it for the introduction. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions.